The Korea-Japan Summit was held in May 2023. The purpose of this summit was to improve communication between both countries. This summit is significant as shuttle diplomacy, which was halted since 2011, has started again. Shuttle diplomacy refers to a third country mediating between two conflicting countries. It originated from the time when Henry Kissinger, the U.S. Secretary of State, mediated conflicts between Arab countries like Egypt, Syria, and Israel. However, in the case of Korea and Japan, shuttle diplomacy means that both leaders can have working-level talks and communicate regularly by visiting each other's countries. It is expected that cultural exchanges between the two countries will actively engage because of the shuttle diplomacy, which started again after 12 years. The agreement between the two countries includes cementing security cooperation against North Korea's nuclear development, strengthening the supply chains of semiconductors, and Korea's inspection of radioactive water from Fukushima. However, the ruling party and the opposition party have completely different opinions regarding the outcome of the Korea-Japan summit. The ruling party and the Blue House judged that Korea would benefit economically and in terms of security after reconciliation with Japan. However, the opposition party judged that Korea gave everything to Japan but took nothing, making it a failed summit, especially regarding the issue of forced labor. Additionally, President Yoon claimed that Japan would be exempted from the Washington Declaration, which was the Korea-US summit held in April. It implies that the US might intervene in the. Moreover, people are concerned that the problem of Fukushima radioactive water will only be inspected by Japan. In fact, Taiwan failed to inspect Fukushima radioactive water a year ago, but they ended up conniving the release of contaminated water and importing marine products from Fukushima. Therefore, people also worry that Korea might end up like Taiwan. Furthermore, the restoration of 치소미아 after the summit increases concerns that Korea could assist in Japan's remilitarization. The relationship between Korea and Japan is love-hate. They have been communicating with each other for more than 2,000 years and have many similarities, affecting each other. However, the relationship became extreme during the colonial period, and Japan has never admitted its colonial history, denying the fact that worsens the relationship. How can we solve the relationship between Korea and Japan? And how has the relationship been ongoing? Now, we can learn about the relationship between Korea and Japan. Korea was a colony of Japan from 1910 to 1945 for 36 years. Unlike other colonial countries controlled by the West, Korea was under Japan's influence, a country communicating for more than 2,000 years in the same region. Japan governed Korea very cruelly and severely, trying to exterminate Korea's own identity and dragging numerous Koreans into the war during World War II. Women were forced to work in factories or became sexual slaves of Japan, while men were used as human shields on the battlefield. However, after Japan's defeat in the war, Korea became an independent country. They did not establish diplomatic relations from 1945, the year of independence, to 1965, and were hostile towards Japan. The first president Syngman Rhee was also an independent movement activist towards Japan during the colonial period. It was obvious that diplomatic relations could not be established. However, the situation changed after 1965. President Park Chung-hee advocated an economic policy called exported-oriented industrialization to save Korea's broken economy. However, it was essential to introduce foreign loans and capital, and normalization of diplomatic relations also had to be established naturally. Therefore, he began to cultivate a friendly and cooperative relationship with Japan. However, the most problematic issue arose in this situation. President Park proposed a joint fund with Japan, offering $300 million free of charge, of which $200 million were paid, and $300 million as a commercial loan under the name of claim and economic cooperation. In reality, this money was referred to as a claim, rather than reparations or compensation. The claim has nothing to do with the relationship between the victorious country and the defeated country. Reparations, on the other hand, are based on guilt and an apology for illegal incidents between countries. Japan claims that their reparations were already fulfilled during the Park government. However, Korea claims that they have not received compensation because Japan has never admitted that their colonial period was illegal. Furthermore, Japan has not apologized for their history to this day. Also, during the Cold War, tensions continued to escalate and the U.S. military attempted to withdraw from Asia and the Korean Peninsula following the Nixon Doctrine in 1969. As a result, President Park had to collaborate with Japan to address North Korea's threat. President Park attempted to form ASPAC, which was similar to Europe's NATO, for Asia-Pacific multilateral economic cooperation. President Park's goal was to establish a self-sufficient economic development and international security system, and to promote the Korea-Japan Normalization Treaty and multilateral partnerships. Korea has continued to adhere to this system. After North Korea's nuclear arms crisis in 1993 and 1994, Korea finally strengthened its cooperation with Japan. However, this cooperation was under U.S. leadership. Actually, the U.S. attempted to neutralize Japan after the harsh battle during World War II. However, not long after that, the Korean War broke out, and the fear of communism spreading in East Asia continued to escalate. Therefore, the U.S. rescued Japan to make it a shield against communism in East Asia. Additionally, the U.S. wanted Japan to take charge of and lead East Asia's security instead of the U.S. It was essential for the U.S. to collaborate between Korea and Japan to deter the threats of China, North Korea, and Russia. Therefore, the complicated history between Korea and Japan was erased in the process. This is similar to the context of the Korea-Japan Comfort Women Agreement in 2016, led by Obama. The comfort women were sacrificed for the purpose of strengthening Korea-US-Japan's ability to cope with the common threat of North Korea's nuclear experiments. The Korean government made an agreement with Japan about comfort women under the pressure of the U.S., without consulting the victims. However, it is not true that Korea has remained silent about historical problems. President Roh Tae-woo emphasized that Japan had to acknowledge the actual state of things and take proper action toward comfort women and other historical issues. President Kim Young-sam was also very hostile toward Japan, to the point of saying, "I have to fix Japan's rude attitude," and pursued the historical rectification project. Additionally, President Lee Myung-bak went to Dokdo, the disputed island between Korea and Japan, to prove that Dokdo is Korean territory. However, Japan has also expressed its opinion of not compromising on historical issues. The Japanese government boiled down its history textbooks about the colonial period, and even revised them to state that the colonial period helped Korea's economic development. Additionally, Japanese Prime Minister's visits to the Yasukuni Shrine, where many war criminals were buried during World War II, angered Koreans. This situation not only slighted Koreans who were forcibly sacrificed by the war but also denied Japan's crimes during the war. Furthermore, Japan has never recognized the fact that forced labor and Japanese military ruled the Comfort Women Organization. Despite historical problems, as mentioned above, Korea and Japan have engaged in economic and security cooperation. Former presidents set the goal of collaborating with the US, China, Japan, and Russia to achieve the relaxation of international tensions in Korea and to improve the relationship between the two Koreas and the stabilization and prosperity of East Asia. However, the problem is growing as the conflict between the US and China escalates. Actually, Korea is one of the countries that have to deal with many diplomatic problems. Geographically, Korea is close to North Korea, China, Japan, and Russia, but the US is their ally. In particular, Korea and China are tightly connected economically, so it is a challenge for Korea to choose between these countries. For example, in 2014, the US claimed to deploy Shuttle, which is an American anti-ballistic missile defense system designed to shoot down short, medium, and intermediate-range ballistic missiles in Korea. However, China opposed the deployment of Shuttle, claiming that it was for checking China. Despite China's opposition, Korea finally accepted the deployment of Shuttle in Korea. In reprisal for this, China took strong measures by banning imports, exports, and travel to Korea. The economic impact was tremendous, leading to a decrease in tourism income of around $160 million. Therefore, Korea has always emphasized strategic ambiguity, and has been holding out between powerful countries by a thread. However, because of the US-China Cold War, Korea has to decide which side to stand on between the US and China. We have to understand the Korea-Japan summit in this context. If we look at the fragmentary results of the summit, it is obvious that Korea gave everything to Japan. Objectively, Korea did not achieve any desired results from the Fukushima radioactive water, reparation of forced labor, Dokdo territory. Of course, Korea could have gained economic profit if communication and trade had flourished. However, it would have benefited not only Korea but also Japan. Diplomacy is a battle of pretending to give 51 but actually gaining 51 by giving 49. However, the Korean government gave everything but gained only trivial profit. However, we have to look into the context of the Korean government's intention. Something has to give now under the new Cold War. Which side does Korea have to stand on? Thanks for watching this video and don't forget to click the subscribe and the like button.